Hey, welcome to the Neighbros. My name is Andy,
And I'm Corey.
and we're just a couple of dads who like to chat about the deep things of the world, right, Corey? We like to solve all the world's problems.
Right. Yeah, Andy and I have been friends for about 20 years. And
Well, friends, really?
and you know, our relationship has been marked by lots of deep, fun conversations, often spiraling out of control into the ridiculous, down dark rabbit holes. Uh,
That
but
is true.
mostly uplifting and challenging and engaging conversations. So we thought we would start to host these online. And I guess for me, one of the reasons I think it's important to do this is um, as people who follow Jesus. It seems that there are a lot of issues in the culture where we're kind of encouraged to keep silent, and we think it's important to resist that urge to stay silent and to try to find an understanding. Not necessarily plant a flag in the ground and say this is our opinion necessarily, but to work through these issues, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much that you can't really even talk about, or you're not supposed to talk about, or you're not allowed to talk about if you look a certain way or believe a certain thing or come from a certain background. But I think we both are just convinced that truth is truth and needs to be spoken, and it doesn't necessarily matter who says it or where, what voice the truth comes through. It
Mm-hmm.
needs to get out there. And I know for you, this is an important thing for me to be able to do, to kind of have something for my kids. Obviously I talk to my kids. I'm not just going to say, hey, go watch the video. I don't really want. Daddy's busy.
Yeah.
Daddy's watching his sports. But it's something that I would like to have a permanent record of for my kids to look back on, because I think the world that they're going to grow up in, and my kids are, most teenagers now mostly, but it's a lot different than the world that we grew up in.
Yes.
Yeah. So I want them to have something to equip them as they move forward into this world where it seems like every boundary is being erased.
Mm-hmm.
Every idea is kind of being turned upside down from before.
Yeah.
So
Every tradition is being challenged,
yeah.
right? And in really kind of sneaky ways, because uh, so many of the things that we would never have questioned, whether that's right or wrong, all of a sudden are being challenged. That we would have thought were common sense or commonly held beliefs, have been challenged or attempted to be eviscerated in a way where it's taken people off guard. And now people stumble back figuring out how to go on the defensive and say, well, wait a minute, well, I mean, if you go back a few years to the traditional marriage debate, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
that for a lot of people came out of nowhere and didn't know how to articulate a defense of traditional marriage. And so some people either didn't and went the way of culture, or they worked through an issue and maybe came out on the wrong side of it. If there's, if we want to take sides, but it was still a, an issue where people were challenged to think in ways they were never expected to think or be challenged before.
Yeah, and that's a good thing, to be challenged to think in those ways and to think through those things that you just take for granted.
Mm-hmm.
So in that sense, I'm grateful for everything that's going on in the world right now, because it really kind of throws me personally back into the scriptures, back into the ancient
Right.
writers or those who've gone before us. Some not so ancient, some people like C.S. Lewis, who saw this stuff coming 75 years ago, been very helpful for me. So yeah, in that sense, I'm grateful, because I do enjoy learning. Okay, why did the church, why did Augustine, why did Aquinas say these things? Why did they teach this for so long? And it's like, oh, okay, all these questions are being brought up again.
Mm-hmm.
And it helps us to think through it, like, oh no, that's why marriage was considered a sacrament, or that's why, um, we have always had these kind of clear delineations between male and female. So I'm excited about that stuff. But before we get into all this stuff, maybe we should introduce ourselves first, since this is episode 1 of the
Yeah.
Neighbros podcast.
Can you
So
explain Neighbros?
Neighbros, yeah. Well, it took us forever to figure out what to call this thing. So Neighbros is the name that I gave to, or my wife gave. I don't remember who, either me or my wife gave to the guys in our old neighborhood. We would get together, sit outside, chat, watch football, or talk about whatever. And it's just kind of,
So you were more than just neighbors, you were neighbros.
That's right. More than neighbors, we were neighbros.
Got it.
And so the idea is that just guys sitting out in the front lawn chatting. And so that idea came to me, from an idea that you had to call the podcast Lawn Chair Philosophers, which is like that whole idea. But neither of us have philosophy degrees, so I don't know that I would want to claim that. But yeah, so that's where it came from. I did have some other ideas, like "Come smell this." I like that idea.
Like Spinal Tap.
Yeah,
smell the glove. Yeah. Oh boy.
I thought it would be so funny to call a podcast that and then never pay off the joke. Like,
that's good.
Every series would be something like, come smell the aroma of obedience to God, or come smell the stench of heresy, or something like that. And you just never pay off the disgusting aspect of that.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
The other funny thing about the name is we are not relatively neighbors at all.
No, definitely not. Thank God.
And that, which is a segue back to your introduction.
Right. So I live in Columbus with my family. I've got
Columbus,
Ohio. Thank you. Yeah, there's a Columbus, Georgia. I live in the big Columbus, Ohio, with my wife and 4 kids, one of whom has gone before us into heaven. If you get on my website, sometimespreacher.com, and search for Zeke, you'll find all kinds of stuff about our sweet little boy who passed away in 2014. But I do have a couple of teenagers with us now, and 10-year-old. So our house is lively. We just moved into a new house this past summer, and kids are over all the time. It's great.
I'm Corey, and I live in the Austin, Texas area. So we are neighbors by 1,300 miles, 1,100 miles, maybe
17-hour drive or something like that, I think.
Yeah. My wife and I have 7 kids, and Andy and I are both small business owners, entrepreneurs, you could say. So it's nice that we can own our time and do things like this in the middle of a work day, and not be overly concerned about, whose time we're stealing.
Right. Which client are you charging this time to again?
We have an NDA in place. I can't.
Yeah, and the kids are at school, and so nobody's knocking on the door or fighting or crying or anything like that.
Right. Which in my house would inevitably be the case. Even with the door locked, people would be pounding on the door. Can I use your bathroom? Can I have a snack?
Yeah, because the only bathroom in your house is actually in your bedroom. It's crazy.
We only have the one bathroom, and it's under the porch. Anybody? Let's throw office reference. Thank you.
Nice. Yeah. So we've been friends for a long time, and we're going to do our very best to not tell jokes that will get us canceled.
Which is what we do in every other conversation.
Right. If the cameras weren't rolling, that's what we would be doing.
Exactly.
But yeah, so that's us, and the idea here is just to chat about stuff, and hopefully provide something for folks that can be informative and helpful and encouraging. And I think, we don't really know how this is going to go. I don't know how this is going to go. I don't know if this is the best way to do it or not. But we're going to start, I think, with a series on wokeness. And I've been writing some longer essays on my website. And we'll start with this idea, the first one in the series, which is called Woke Apocalypse. And this series is called Christianity in the Age of Wokeness. I think that's right. I don't remember. Yes, that is right. Christianity in the Age of Wokeness. And so the link, we'll put the link in the show notes or whatever. Put it up on YouTube.
The site is thesometimespreacher.com.
Yeah, that's right.
If you want to follow along.
Yeah. Yeah. So I start with this, this idea that we are living in crazy times. And I think we can all agree to that, right? It's crazy. And there's this idea that so if you believe that men and women are different biologically, that's a bigoted idea. Mm-hmm. And the very idea of using the word belief there is important because it's considered a belief, not a statement of fact, which seems absolutely insane.
Seems like it's harder and harder to make and stand behind a statement of fact anymore.
Right. Yeah. And things that seem blatantly obvious, you can't even say them. So really what I want to do is explore what is going on. Why is this happening? I want to talk about what wokeness is, try to define it for us. And the reason that I use apocalyptic language is because, for me, the way that I've come to understand the book of Revelation is that the first readers would have read it and said, yeah, that's us and the beast, or the beasts and the Antichrist and all that stuff. That's all Rome, the Roman emperor. They would have very clearly made those connections. They wouldn't have been thinking like, what, the mark of the beast, is that like a microchip? They wouldn't have been looking for future explanations for all this stuff, all the imagery in the book of Revelation. They would have said, we're living this right now.
Right.
And so the question I that kind of struck me is like, okay, once Christianity stops being persecuted and those people or Christianity becomes like the official religion of the Roman Empire, when Constantine converts, and after that, what is Revelation then? And so I look at Revelation and say, this stuff is cyclical. We are constantly living in this cycle of beasts and antichrists. And you could say, well, yeah, it's, this stuff is coming in the future. And yes, that's true. It will come in the future. It will pass away because the church will be victorious, because the church is always victorious. And then there will come another one and another one. So that's kind of the way that I see it. And I think that right now, in our particular age, at least in the West, wokeness is the beast that is before us, the beast of our generation.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that
what do you think is a common thread if you look back at church history at some of the different iterations of the beast? Is there something common, like a common thread that in terms of what is the beast trying to accomplish ultimately?
That's a good question. I think the beast or beasts, or maybe it's just a reincarnation of the same evil spirit. I don't know. It's just the same ideas coming back over and over again. They're always opposed to the work of God. They're always actively opposed to God's people, the church. And whatever the beast is trying to do, or I'm sorry, whatever God is trying to do, the beast seems to be trying to undermine it. So when we look in church history, obviously, very early on, you had the persecutions where the beast is trying to just crush Christianity. I think today we live in a time where the beast is trying to subvert Christianity and to
Mhm.
undermine it. I think maybe in the past, the beast has tried to, what's the word I'm looking for? Convert Christianity to its own ends, so to corrupt it. Certainly you think about some of the epochs in the High Middle Ages where the papacy became just totally corrupt.
Mm.
That's certainly the movement, I think, of the beast. So it's always in opposition to the church. It's not necessarily always oppressive persecution. We need to be smart and have our eyes open to all the different ways that the beast might try to work against the church. It's always, always, always going to be opposition to the church and
Mhm.
to the work of God.
Mhm.
And I've been reading in Ephesians 2, well, Ephesians 1, 2, and 3 lately. It's just kind of where my devotional reading has taken me. And Paul talks about God's mysterious will being revealed. And he says, I think it's in Ephesians 1, he says, God's will is to unite all things in heaven and on earth under Christ. Like that's what God is doing. All things in heaven, so every spiritual being and all things on earth, every human being are, it's God's will that they all be united together under Christ.
Mhm.
Um, so wokeness, I see it, and I think it's divisive. I mean, don't you think it just seems really divisive to me?
Sure. Sure. Yeah. And it's it pits people against each other, right? So without going too far into this rabbit hole, you look at, the nothing is new under the sun, right? And you look at what Karl Marx made popular in terms of there's an oppressor class and an oppressed class, and that has obviously been a repeating theme throughout history, but it's a new iteration of it. And it seems, there was, for instance, just to bring it close to home, my 14-year-old son says in was it history or geography? I don't remember what class or why it's related, but the teacher talked about asking the question, are men and women truly equal? To which most of the students said, well, yeah. Yeah, she says, not really. And it turned into a big, class-wide debate. And, you know, he gave me the highlights of, here's some of the points that we used. And, we looked up some of this data, and, and I said, hey, you got to pull back for a second and ask yourself, why is this conversation even happening?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Why this animosity? Does it exist? Does a problem as it's framed really exist, or is it something else? So that got him thinking, that led us into a different conversation, because it's not always the best tactic to just start peppering the opposition, so to speak, with facts. Um, we'll let people like Ben Shapiro and Matt Walsh do that kind of back and forth, but you know, I wanted him to look at the bigger picture instead of just thinking, how do I win this argument? But there's something bigger going on, right? Where why this opposition? Why do we need to have this animosity? Does the problem really exist as you state, or is it something else? I think it's something else, something deeper, something more divisive. Because if it's just a matter of dollars and cents, that can be fixed very quickly, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
Like
theoretically.
theoretically, yes. Yeah. Yeah. So, and what is meant by equality? What's meant by equal?
Right,
It's important to define the terms.
right.
And that's something that is very difficult to do with wokeness, because you hear words
Mm-hmm.
equality, diversity, inclusion, equity, and you think, oh, I know what those mean.
Sure.
Critical, the word critical, I know what the word critical means,
Mm,
but they all mean something different in wokeness. And
sure.
yeah, there's just a lot of deception and manipulation of language. And I mean, I just, you know, the Bible says that the native tongue of the devil is deception. And
Mm,
I've just come to believe that anywhere that deception reigns, where it's happening,
mm-hmm.
that's where evil is present. And so if it, I look at situations and I think, man, that doesn't make sense. Like, not to go down this rabbit trail, but the COVID virus origins, like,
Mm,
they said, it's racist to say it came from a lab leak, so it comes from an exotic food wet market. And I just thought, that doesn't make any sense.
mm-mm.
It You're saying it's racist to say that the virus escaped from a lab, but it's not racist to say, oh, those Chinese, those backwards Chinese people eat weird food like bats. Like,
Mm,
that
mm.
seems really flipped, like the
It doesn't.
opposite, right?
No.
And there just was all this obfuscation about, you're not allowed to talk about where it came from. We're not going to ask that question. If you think it, came from a lab, you're a racist. And so there's all this accusation, and
Mm,
it feels really weird, right? And
right.
then and I think I looked at a situation like that and I said, there's evil there. Because that's deceptive. It's manipulative and it's deceptive. And so there's evil there. There's something evil going on there. And come to find out, right, 2 years later, all this stuff is coming out. And one of my own personal heroes, Francis Collins, is all caught up in it, and he was involved with it, and it just breaks my heart. And then a lot of these other people I really looked up to, who were kind of, helping him out, or they trusted him or whatever, and so they were kind of pushing his messaging out there to the public, these influential evangelicals. And it's like, I'm pretty broken about that stuff. I don't really want I don't know if I'm ready to
Yeah.
talk about all that stuff,
Well,
but
yeah, that is a good conversation for another time for a
yeah.
couple, lots of reasons, right? But I think, uh, look, from the beginning, there were logical incongruencies, but I think even more importantly, there was an instinctual problem. Like people on an instinct or intuition, I should say, on an intuitional level. I mean, that was from day one in March. I mean, on an intuition level, something was wrong in my spirit. I think there's a lot of people who experience that, on an intuition level, who either, try to be calm and reasonable and maybe wait. But yeah, that's another topic, and a sensitive one in our family. After it's been just a couple months since my wife lost her father to
Yeah.
this stupid disease. So
Yeah.
um, well, let's get back to wokeness. So
Yeah.
one of the things I'm curious about before we explore more, like out of what you've written in particular, is what was your first experience? When did you become aware of this idea of wokeness? Do you remember your first impressions, or what, what was your first experience with this idea of being woke?
Oh man, that's a good question, because woke, I think, is a newer term for something that's been around a long time. Political correctness is what we used to call it. So, I mean, I remember political correctness from when I was a college student at Ohio
Hmm.
State. I took once I dropped out of computer science engineering, stopped being a computer science engineering major and became a theater major. I had to take all these humanities classes. So I'd
Hold
done
on,
all
I
my
just have to juxtaposition here, because at first it seemed like humble brag when Ohio State,
that's right.
but then you reverse course and say, "Oh, but I went from political or from science to theater," and that seems like a course correction. So we're back on. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I don't hang my MB, not MB, my BA in theater. I don't hang that in my office. So
Okay.
yeah, but I had to take all these humanities courses, and so I did. I was like, all right, I'm going to take a women's studies class. Oh my gosh, that was a lot.
Mm,
Um, there's stuff that was going on in that class. Uh, there, I don't know if I can even share this. So there was one day, pornography was one of the topics,
mm,
and I was starting to think like, okay, you know what, this is actually a place where Christians and non-Christian feminists would have a lot of overlap. Like we could actually
mm.
join together and fight against this in a public way. But it's like, it seemed like the way that the professor at least wanted to take it was a little different, and so what
Like
wound up
the
happening,
like how pornography can be empowering for women, that route,
I'm
or
not sure if that idea was out there yet, but it was. So what happened was, um, I think it was more like, let me show you what a real woman looks like. And so what happened was, in class, she put up like a pencil drawing of, a nude woman who, I don't know, somebody overweight and,
mm.
you know, middle age, late middle age kind of a thing.
It's so funny how you are self-editing even your descriptions right now based on political correctness and what's
Right.
because 20-30 years ago you would have had a few adjectives roll off the tip of your tongue. But now we're sensitive,
We're
right?
sensitive. Yeah, I
Yeah,
want to be sensitive to that. Yeah.
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 Not that
It's
that's bad. I'm not
right.
criticizing.
No,
I think
there's,
it's appropriate, but
yeah, there's good in this. There's
sure.
some good in this for sure. So anyway, she puts this picture up and just continues with the lecture, and it's up for like a long time, and it's nude, right? It's a hand drawn nude thing. And I'm just like, I'm in the, like, I don't want to look at it. I feel like I can't look at it as a Christian. It's like, I can't see that. I don't
Mhm.
want to see that. And so finally I raised my hand and I said, do you mind taking that off? It's hard to hear, it's hard to focus on what you're saying with that image up on the screen. It was fine. She was gracious and took it down, but
Mm.
I felt like a sicko or a pervert or like wrong, and maybe that was just me being weird about my feelings or whatever, but it felt like, um, oh yeah, one person like said after I asked, she said that, oh, I didn't even notice it anymore. I was like, oh, well, not for you, good for
She?
you. Yeah, it was a girl. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
And so that was probably like my first moment, like really immersive moment, into a politically correct environment,
Mm.
and
Yeah.
which has now become, I think, wokeness.
My experience is probably right around the same time, but I was in high school. I mean, you are significantly older than me.
Yes, I am your
And,
father.
but it was in high school and it was surrounding the R word.
Oh, okay.
You know,
I'm like, what's the R word?
relating to people with disabilities,
Right.
which was a word we used to throw around casually, like
Mhm.
kids of the 80s and 90s used to, until
Yeah.
it became, oh, well, it's slander, or
Right.
it's insensitive.
Yeah.
And of course, I don't think that the political correctness as a movement was completely irredeemable. I think you're right. I think there's value in saying, hey, you need to be conscious of how your words affect other people.
For sure.
You
Yeah.
shouldn't be so insensitive. And you know, this idea of inclusionary or exclusionary language, I think there's some value to that too. There's something to be gained there. Um, but what we're more concerned with, and I think where our conversation will go, is how that mindset predominates or becomes an overriding ideology in our daily discourse.
Yeah. Like, I was trying to source this. but I could not figure out where it was. I wrote this in my post, because I know that some school administrators said this, but I could not find it. And I didn't, like, I'm not great with Google searches, but I wrote that our schools have given up on teaching children to be good and productive citizens within their communities. What matters now is not real skill or basic competency in reading, writing, and arithmetic, but the inculcated passion to become activists and world changers. And one school administrator, I think, like, this was all because of the lockdowns or whatever. She said something to the effect of, it doesn't matter if our kids aren't reading at grade level, they know how to become um, activists for justice or social
Mm.
activists, or something to that level.
Mm.
And so I have a little parenthetical comment that I put in my essay. I said, God help the world when those who seek to change it cannot even say that 2 + 2 = 4.
Right.
Which
Right.
is another
Yeah.
thing. There's another whole blow up on Twitter a year or two ago where all these woke people are trying to, get around the whole 2 + 2 = 4 thing. They're trying to say 2 + 2 = 5, and it's like,
Mm.
I mean, it's literally Orwellian 1984, the 2 and 2 = 4 thing
Mm.
in our world. And it's just astounding. It's really astounding that it's
Yeah.
happening. So that again, that's kind of why I have this apocalyptic language, and people criticize me for this. They say you're being divisive, or your language is too strong, and that's some of the criticism I get actually in the comments on the post. And my pushback to that is, wokeness is trying to turn the world upside down. That is what woke people are trying to do. They're saying that's what they're trying to do, so you should believe them.
Mm.
And not just the bad stuff, everything. So when they say 2 + 2 = 5, they mean that. They mean that we cannot depend on math anymore, because math is white supremacist. And so we need
Right.
to overturn math. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't want any bridges or buildings built by woke engineers. I don't want my home to be put together by a woke contractor who believes that 2 + 2 = 5.
Right.
That's a recipe for disaster. I'm
Right.
thinking about medicine. Well, how much of this chemical and this chemical go into
Mhm.
creating a cure for cancer or something like that? Whatever you feel.
Sure. And this highlights another vein running through the woke, right, mindset, is reductionism, or no, deconstruction
Okay, yeah,
is
yeah,
what I
yeah.
meant. Deconstruction.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we're deconstructing arithmetic
Right.
in a sense, right?
Yeah.
And we're breaking it down and calling into question, all of the building blocks, all of the fundamentals, everything that we have held to know to be true, verifiably true. Oh, how do you even know anything?
Right.
And that's scary. It's scary I think maybe it's a fun exercise. Well, how do you know that 2 + 2 = 4? And but I think with the goal of reinforcing what should be fundamentally true. We know that 2 and 2 is 4 for good reasons.
Mm-hmm.
But it's scary to see how many other Christ followers I hear saying, well, I'm deconstructing my faith.
Right.
Okay. I think it's great if a follower of Christ has a realization that they've accepted a lot of axioms or presuppositions or ideas without challenging them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you will reinforce what you know to be true, or what is true, if you can challenge it, if you can lean up against it and see how firm it is. But it seems like the goal of people pushing deconstruction is eradication, not reinforcement, or
Right.
re-education rather than reinforcement of what we know to be true, or supplanting what we know to be true with something else.
Yeah. Yeah. I know that I've been on my own journey of re-understanding my faith. I, I think I was very blessed in the parents that I had and the church environment that I grew up in. I hear a lot of stories from evangelicals or former evangelicals, and they talk about the churches they grew up in. And I'm like, man, that doesn't seem familiar to me.
No.
Yeah.
You're talking about kind of in the context of how they were hurt by it or misled by it or mistreated.
Hurt, misled, mistreated, um, but also like very fundamentalist, very black and white. I don't know. I don't know that I received that kind of Christianity. Like I was reading C.S. Lewis in high school because my
Mhm.
parents said that would be a good idea.
Hmm.
I wasn't reading. I mean, I don't even know who the alternatives would be, but we were not a fundamentalist kind of a family.
Mhm.
So for me, it was, yeah, I went to a fundamentalist Christian school, but I think even in school, I would look back now and say, well, they were doing their best. Like I probably attributed bad intentions to people who did not have bad intentions. But I would look at that kind of um, environment and say that was authoritarian or patriarchal or whatever. But my goal is always to find Jesus.
Right.
I know that even myself, I'm a very imperfect um, reflection of Christ, and my own kids are going to have to go through their own process of finding Jesus separate from me, right? I mean, kids
Mhm.
think, when they think of God, they get their idea of God from their fathers. And even though I'm like almost a perfect father,
Mhm.
it's just far enough far enough off, way
Mm.
far off, that they're going to have to go through their own process. And
Yes,
some people call that deconstruction. I don't necessarily think it's deconstruction. I think you just make your faith your own. That's
of
what you
course.
do. It's coming of age.
Yes.
Yeah. And deconstruction for me, I don't know what you think of it. I think of it as suspicion, suspicion of bad intentions on the
Yeah.
part of those who brought you up.
It feels like an unhealthy skepticism
Yeah.
to me.
Yeah.
I think we both agree, and most people, I think, in our circles at least, would agree. Like, uh, we don't think God is opposed to our skepticism, right?
Right. Yeah.
He's not opposed to that. And I think what he wants is to be, he's revealed himself in so many ways in nature and throughout history because he wants to be known.
Right.
How
That's
do we
right.
know anything? How do we know anything unless we challenge it and test it?
Hmm.
And it's proved over and over again. And I think, my testimony is a testimony of having the Lord prove over and over again his goodness and faithfulness. So it would have to be a lot of cognitive dissonance, a lot of forgetting to walk away. I'm not saying that I'm beyond ever walking away. I hope
Hmm.
that's not true, but um, people do it. And I think you have to actively forget a lot of really interesting experience for that to take over. But yeah, just the term deconstructing, right? It has a connotation. I mean, what does it mean? I mean, what do they intend when they say deconstruction, other than to unbuild or to deconstruct, to take apart?
Yeah. Yeah.
And a lot of things that are built, you talk about buildings, and I work in a construction trade. uh, a, a lot of things that are built aren't meant to be unbuilt. They don't
Right.
become unbuilt very easily. um, and then if they are not put back together the same way. That's almost a certainty. So but maybe that is the goal, is we don't want to put it back together the same way.
That's, man, I look at a lot of people that I know who used to be Christians and are not, and went through this deconstruction process. And it seems like, yeah, there was no intention to put it back together. Or I think what happens a lot is that either in their own minds, or they're taught to do this, is that
Mhm.
the center is not the foundation. And so the center, which is Jesus, and the beliefs like the Trinity and the
Mhm.
resurrection, crucifixion, resurrection of Christ, like those core things are the center of the faith. And if that's not the foundation, then as when you deconstruct the foundation, everything falls apart.
Sure.
And
Sure.
then you've got nothing left.
Yeah.
So for me, if I'm, I've changed my mind on certain things. I've changed my mind on origins. I've changed my mind on eschatology. I'm sure that I've changed my mind on plenty of other things.
Mm,
But I've
for
done that
sure.
because I know that, keep hitting my microphone. I know that Jesus is the center, and
Mhm.
um, those other things they're just trying to get me to Him. They're built on the foundation of Christ.
Yes.
They're not the foundation themselves. And it's okay to like, if you want to quote unquote deconstruct this dilapidated part of your faith, you should do that. Like, if the whole thing needs to come
Mhm.
down, there's certain, prosperity gospel. For me, the whole, I hesitate to say this, but the rapture theology, like there's some things that just kind of, we can take those apart,
Sure.
um, and then we can start to replace them. But yeah, if Jesus isn't the center, once you start deconstructing,
Yeah.
you lose him too.
That's I think that's a risk. That is a threat for sure. And you talk about the people who have quote walked away, right? Deconstructed, didn't reassemble. I mean, just stick with the analogy of taking apart a building or demolishing a building is really what you're doing,
Mm-hmm.
right? You take it apart down to the studs, and then what?
Yeah.
Is there an active um, desire to rebuild? And what is rebuilt? Is it rebuilt around or on a different foundation
Mm-hmm.
altogether? Or do people can hopefully that if this is a practice that somebody is engaging, which I think at this point I would challenge you not to take the route of quote deconstructing my faith,
Yeah.
um, because I think it's altogether, first of all, dangerous because the goal isn't clear what you're trying to do. So if what you're trying to do is have a more genuine, more authentic, um, real experience with walking with God as he intended, then there are ways to do that without throwing everything out or destroying everything,
Yeah.
right? And then there are some other dangerous ideas that are bolted onto that, right? Like what are some of the premises of patriarchal thinking, right? Like it's about the arbitrary pursuit of power, or the obtaining of power is really the only real goal. Then how a lot of organized religion, is particularly in the West, is patriarchal, and it's designed with a hierarchy where men primarily are in charge, and they have to keep that power structure in place if they're going to perpetuate it. And so that's just, there's a lot there that's
Mm-hmm.
toxic, that isn't helpful. I think there are a lot of corrections and a lot of healing that could be made without having to destroy everything.
Yeah. No, I like that analogy. And you can think of Marx giving you a sledgehammer
Sure.
to deconstruct your worldview, your faith. He doesn't give you anything else. He doesn't give you what are
A
the
scalpel,
drywall?
right?
He doesn't give you a scalpel or a
Right.
drywall
They're
saw to,
mixing metaphors,
yeah.
creating a malaphor.
Yeah. Paul was good at that, so that's all right.
Yeah,
We're still being biblical.
sure.
Yeah, but yeah, you talked about power, and if you start to see everything in the lens of power, which is what that's what wokeness does. It gives you the
Mhm.
lens of power, and that's all you can see everything in the world through. You've got one tool, and it's a sledgehammer, and that's all that it is. You don't have a
Right.
hammer, you don't have a saw, you don't have anything that will help you build something back or put
Sure.
supports in place while you take out what's moldy and what's shaky.
Sure.
You've only got, your chip on demo day. That's it. That's all you
Your
are.
Chip.
Yeah.
Oh, Chip Gaines, if he finds out that he's now the icon for wokeness, he's going to be really upset.
Yes, I'm sure this will get to him. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good point, right? There's to mix the metaphors again, you have surgery, right? With someone has cancer, we don't throw the entire body away.
Right.
Right. You have to attack it. You have to attack the malignancy at its source.
Yeah.
And there's no doubt, right? There's no doubt when you look around, when we look at what goes on in the church and in the West in particular. I don't know, I don't know enough to speak about the church anywhere else in the world, but
Mm-hmm.
in the West, I mean, there's malignancy everywhere.
Yeah.
There's sickness everywhere, and there are, there are ways that those illnesses and those maladies can be addressed, and it doesn't require disbanding the entire church structure as it exists now. Maybe certain congregations. I
Mm-hmm.
can think of a few in Texas where, go ahead and just disband. That's fine.
Yeah.
Won't name any names.
Yeah. No, better not to. Yeah. And I think that a lot of people turn to wokeness because it really is a alternative religion. It provides so much of the same zeal and rhetorical malpractice that we find in evangelicals. And I say that as a former evangelical preacher, not former evangelical, but a former preacher. I still consider myself evangelical, even though I don't really ever say that. I don't think about those kind of things, but
I don't even know what that word means anymore.
I don't either. It's more a political word than anything else. And I don't think I fit that mold, but wokeness really is a religion. And what's interesting is that a lot of the people who are identifying it as a religion are atheists.
Mm.
And I was thinking about this today. Just I think like people like Peter Boghossian and James Lindsay and Helen Pluckrose, who work together to do those grievance, the what's the grievance studies papers that were all faked. Did you hear about those?
Yes, amazing.
Yeah,
Outstanding.
so good. And as far as I know, they're all atheists. I think about John McWhorter and his book Woke Racism, which is really, really good. He's an atheist. Lots of other people who are atheists, and they're like, this is a religion.
Mm-hmm.
It's 100% a religion. And it's so interesting to me that I'm not hearing that from Christians. And I think the reason is because atheists have their antenna up for religious talk, and they want to oppose that.
Well, what's interesting too is there's even more prominent atheists recognizing from at least like a psychological perspective that there is a placeholder for the divine in the human mind, right? So they're, for whatever reason they believe it to exist, evolutionarily speaking, it exists. So it seems that you've got people who are less and less, at least, showing animus towards religion because they sympathize with this idea, like evolutionarily speaking, we have it in our wiring that there's something divine, that we have to ascribe. There has to be a placeholder. We can't leave that part of us, in a vacuum. I think even Sam Harris would be one. He's vocal against organized religion and Western religions in particular, but I think he recognizes that place.
Yeah. Yeah, Brett
And
Weinstein even makes the point that religion serves an important evolutionary function.
mhm,
And he says it's religion is true metaphorically, but not true literally. Of course,
mm.
I agree with him about every religion except Christianity, um,
Sure.
and Judaism because of that.
Yeah.
Up until Christ, and so yeah, I appreciate that. Admitting that there is a religious instinct in man, and we can
Mhm.
talk about, well, what does that mean?
Sure.
What
And so it's interesting then that you have the 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 ones you would call Christians or Christ followers who don't experience this the same way because they have a defined placeholder for the divine, for the sacred. But on the atheist side, or for those who are out, maybe not just sans religion, so to speak, yes, this does become like a religious, it does kind of fill the religious, vacuum, so to speak. And I shared this with you a couple weeks ago. I saw this tweet. It was from the folks at Prager. It says wokeness preys upon a person's desire to be a good person and the vulnerabilities associated with thinking they might not be.
hmm,
Right. So
yeah,
there is something there, there's an appeal. There's an appeal to morality. When I read this, I think there's an appeal to guilt, obviously.
yeah,
The
yeah,
vulnerabilities associated with thinking you might not be, that's guilt. That's how I read that. So it makes an interesting appeal. And we know guilt has been used throughout the church's history as a way
sure,
to control
yep,
behavioral modification.
hmm,
Um, it was a hallmark of my mother's upbringing. Was they talked about how guilt was used as a tool. They were Roman Catholic until the 70s, when a lot of my aunts and uncles became Protestant, so to speak.
hmm, hmm,
But the religious nature of wokeness, it is it's hard to describe. It's hard to explain. I mean, I get it from that perspective for the non-religious, but I still don't quite understand how those in the church and those trying to be faithful have adapted it or have appended it or have added it, bolted this on to their faith walk, or however you want to say it.
yeah, yeah. And I think the answer to that, and maybe we'll wind it down here, is that wokeness. I think the most generous definition that you can give for wokeness is compassion for the oppressed. That's a good thing. It is
I th-
good to be
but I think
compassionate for oppressed people.
that doesn't need a special category. It can just be compassion for the oppressed can be its own thing,
Yeah,
right?
totally. Right. Yes. And what do we mean by compassion? What do the woke mean by compassion? What do
Mm-hmm.
they mean by oppressed? How do we understand oppressed? I think,
Yes.
that's the second essay in the series is all about compassion. The third essay is about oppression. Compassion's already out. Oppression will be out soon, hopefully.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, you're right. That does not need to be a separate thing. But I think it goes back to this deconstruction conversation, is that people look back on their evangelical faith or whatever, you know, movement they grew up in, Christian
Mm-hmm.
movement. They look back on it through a very, what's the opposite of rose colored, right? Like a very, I don't even know, in as negative light as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And they say, you know,
Sepia.
yeah,
Isn't that what they use in the movies when they're looking back on an unfriendly memory, an unpleasant memory? Is
yeah, it
that
would be like in sepia, like half black and white, but with like a
yeah,
brown tint on it. Yeah,
yeah,
like an old western or something.
right.
But yeah, they look back on it with the worst, and ascribe to people the worst intentions and say, well, they never cared about this or they were harsh about that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think and so they see uncompassionate. Sometimes that's true for sure. I think a lot of times is a lot more complicated than that. And maybe the people they're accusing of being uncompassionate were incredibly compassionate in other areas that they never even knew about. Who even knows? Because people are
Sure.
freaking complicated.
Mhm.
So yeah, so I think that the flip comes through this idea of, oh, what's most important is that we be compassionate to the marginalized, to the hurting, to the poor, to the oppressed.
Mhm.
And that's what real religion looks like. And so that's where I'm going to invest my time.
We're gonna unpack how it isn't actually so.
Yeah, and in the next episode we'll talk about compassion and what that means
Mhm.
in wokeness and what that means in Christianity.
Very good. Well, this times well with my dog who's barking to get
I
outside.
heard something sound like somebody's either cutting like vegetables on a board or it's your dog barking.
It's
So,
barking. Yeah.
all right, well, until next time,
All right. Thanks for joining us on the Neighbros.
the Neighbros.